Hi, this is Ryan Braunagel, and
I'm Tom Braunagel.
We're with the Braunagel team over here at Keller Williams Realty, and today we just wanted to cover negotiating and closing the sale of your home. So once you found a buyer that is interested, what are the next steps? So, now the offer, that's the next step. A buyer typically initiates the offer.
Yep.
And really, you want to make sure that this offer is in writing. In Connecticut, offers are not enforceable unless they're in writing.
That's right.
So, and then there are two different types of offers. There's a binder, and then there's an actual contract. A binder, that is an intent to purchase. A buyer would submit that, and then after that is executed, it actually goes to an attorney to be written up in a formal contract. We don't recommend this because you will want to get everything in writing and agreed upon up front. We've seen changes to binders. The contract, we believe, is the way to go because everything is agreed upon up front.
Yeah. And keep in mind that when you receive an offer, there are two diametrically opposed forces that are in play, right? You're the seller, you want to sell this house in terms that are best for you, and the buyer is trying to get it in terms that are best for him or her. And don't be offended. Don't take this personal. As a matter of fact, you have an offer. You're right. You've been trying to sell your home at this point for I don't know how long, and the fact that you have an offer is a fact to actually celebrate.
It's good news.
It's wonderful news. Realize that the offer is the first offer given by the buyer. It is in their terms, through their filter, with their personal best interest in mind. They're hoping that you're going to just sit and accept it.
It's not their final offer.
It's not their final offer. You have an opportunity to review all the terms and make a counteroffer.
Yeah, and so what are those terms?
Yeah.
There's quite a few things that you can negotiate within a contract. So it's not always all about price. Yes, that's important, but we wanted to review the other terms that are negotiable. So along with the offer, there's going to be an initial deposit that they put down. This is funds that they put down up front. It's going to be held in an escrow account, and once that the home moves towards closing, it will be put towards their closing costs. But typically this is 1% of the purchase price of the home, and if anything goes wrong and the buyer actually defaults on the contract, you could stake a claim to those funds.
Yeah, those funds should be made probably to your attorney's business. So your attorney, you should have an attorney if you're doing this on your own, will have an escrow account. You'll put it to his name and trustee. So if it's John Smith, attorney John Smith, trustee, that's the term that you use for it to go into the escrow account.
Yeah, and definitely make sure that those funds are deposited as well.
Yeah.
There is a second deposit. This is typically closer to 2.5%, sometimes up to 10% of the purchase price of the property. And that second deposit typically is put down after the completion of the inspection contingency.
Yeah.
So once you move past that contingency, again, same thing goes for this deposit.
Yeah, and this is a gauge. It really is. It's a gauge on how serious the buyer is. It's important for you to know what kind of mortgage that they're getting because, for example, FHA, you can get a 97.5% mortgage. So that means they're only putting 3.5% down.
Yep.
Right? I would require all 3.5% to be given to me. If they're apprehensive about that, you start to wonder and question Why? Are there financial issues,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or are they potentially still looking and maybe ready to walk away from a smaller amount that they might be putting down? You want to secure the deal with that second deposit, and you get to choose what that is. Generally speaking, it's another 2.5% on top of the 1% that is there,
Mm-hmm.
and it could be up to 10%.
Yeah, it's a good gauge of how strong of a buyer they are for your home. Next, we move on to the inspection contingency. So make sure you're comfortable with the types of inspections that they're doing. So you've got a bunch of different types that they can go through and inspect. They can inspect the fireplace. They could general, structural, radon, water. A whole slew of different types of inspections, but make sure that you know what types they are considering doing, and then the time frames to complete those inspections. So a typical time frame, I would say, generally they should be able to complete that within a week and a half.
Correct. Yeah, don't let them drag it out. If they're interested, they need to, and they make an offer within a week and a half, they should have the inspections done, and you should start negotiating on any items that they want identified and resolved.
Yep.
So mortgage contingencies, this is a big deal. So in a contract, the mortgage contingency is the day at which they have to move ahead. They're committing to moving ahead to purchase your home regardless of their ability to secure financing. So that mortgage contingency date is the date that they have to have a commitment from their bank to provide them funds to buy your home. They can no longer back out of that transaction based on their ability or inability to provide mortgage a mortgage for you. So monitor that date, watch that date, and hold the buyer accountable to that date because it's a big one.
Yeah, and then of course you've got the closing date. So is that closing date gonna line up with your move, with your time frames? Just to make sure that is a good date for you. Don't be afraid to suggest a different time frame.
Sure, and there are things that can be on the contract, inclusions, exclusions. If there's anything about the home that you want to make sure that you take with you, specify it. Let them know, and it doesn't necessarily have to be on the contract itself, but on the contract you could have an addendum subject to this addendum, and on the addendum you would write in there, I'm taking the fill in the blank with me. Generally speaking, anything that's attached to the building, anything that's attached to the property, goes with the sale. Doesn't have to. You can call it out, especially if you want, and say that I'm taking this with me. But if you don't mention it, the standard is if it's attached and affixed, it is included with the sale of the home.
Yeah, the next one, it's a big one. It's nearly always an addendum, so a separate page on the contract that's submitted at the same time. It's a seller concession. So what is that? That is when the buyer asks within the offer for funds to be delivered back to them at closing to help fund their closing costs or down payment. This one directly affects your bottom line, so pay attention to that. As far as seller concession goes, it depends on how much they can ask for. It depends on the type of financing that they have, but typically it's no more than 3% of the sale price.
Yeah. And now that you've gone through all the different categories, all the different options in the contract, in a standard contract, you have a decision to make. The decision is, I'm either going to accept the contract as it is, okay? I'm going to reject the contract and the offer, or I'm going to counter the contract. Important to note that when I counter the contract, I'm in essence doing two things. I'm rejecting and I'm proposing a new contract. So that means that once we begin the contract process, they present me with an offer. The moment that I counter that offer, I have essentially told them I'm rejecting your contract and here's a new one. They could ultimately say, oh, well, I reject your counter and walk away, deal's over. There's no, money goes back to the to the buyer, and the deal is legally over. Now, I'm not an attorney. I don't mean to imply any legal boundaries there, but the deal from the contract perspective is over at that point. So keep in mind you want to hold yourself and be reasonable during the process, because at any time, once there's a counter, if they counter to you, you have the same option. You could say, I reject your counter offer, deal's done.
Yeah, and keep in mind, this is a business decision, a business negotiation for you. So try to remove all of the emotions from this process entirely, so that you can effectively respond to that counteroffer.
Yeah.
And when you're responding, ask the buyers, are there, other than price, are there other conditions that are important to them? That's a very crucial question, because if there's something else that's important to them, maybe you could start negotiating on that and keep more money in your pocket.
Yeah. So how you respond to the offer is crucial. It's critical. Ultimately, there's a buyer who wants to buy, there's a seller who wants to sell, and the idea is to create a set of terms that you're both comfortable with, and how you respond, to each of these items is critical. And I would also suggest that when you respond to all the items, even if you accept them. You accept the closing date. You say this is good. The mortgage contingency is fine. The amount of money that you're putting down is fine, and the price needs to be this. You respond that way so that there's no misinterpretation of what we're all agreeing to.
Yeah, it's a checklist to make sure you're going through everything as well. And when you fill out that final offer, you want to put, or when you determine the final terms, you're going to want to put that in writing as well, and make sure that you have their pre-approval letter. Give their mortgage broker a call. Basically, qualify the mortgage broker. Make sure he did his job, that he got all of their documents for the pre-approval, that he ran their credit check, and make sure that you've filled out those property disclosures, the lead disclosure, and have that initial deposit check in hand so that you can get that put into the escrow account.
Yeah. And follow the contract. Make sure you hold the buyer accountable. I would not put that in anyone else's hands. If this deal that you've worked so hard to secure falls through, there's nobody, in my opinion, to blame other than yourself. You know what has to be done. You negotiated all of the details, and it is clearly up to you to make sure that the buyer performs on their commitments. So, excuse me.
Yeah, make sure that everything is in order on the contract before you start packing your bags and loading up the truck to move. So you'll want to make sure that who's actually calling your mortgage company if there's a mortgage on the house to find out what the payoffs are, who's calling to make sure that the taxes are settled. Usually the attorney does, but just make sure. Make sure that you have a clear understanding of that settlement statement, so you know where all your money went to, and you could feel comfortable that if there's any equity in the house, that all that equity is represented in the check that you're going to get at closing. Yeah, and then there's a bunch of little details. So things like your utilities. Make sure, don't forget to transfer them out of your name. So your cable, your electric, your gas. If you don't, then after closing, you'll continue to pay for the buyer's utilities at that point in time.
Yeah. So, I mean, at that point, you've closed, you've scheduled, your move. Yeah, you're out of the house, and we simply have to say congratulations.
Good job.
We hope you make it here. If you don't, we would love to hear from you. Please feel free to give us a call. We've been doing this for an awful long time, and would love to offer our knowledge, our systems, to help make your transaction smooth and a great experience.
Yep, stress-free.
Stress-free. So our phone number is 203-268-4994. You'll reach the Braunagel team. You'll be speaking either with Ryan or myself, and we thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.